Okay, we're getting really close to finishing the architectural features on the inside of the building. In this lesson, we'll talk about specialties and furnishings. And for the most part, both of these items happen after finishes are complete, but there are a couple specialties that happen actually before finishes. So I'll try to identify those as we go through this class. Specialties, which I'll define here in a minute, all fall under CSI Division 10. And there's usually a specific contractor that does just Division 10, a specialties contractor. For shades and blinds and office furniture like you see in the photo, that all falls under CSI Division 12, furnishings. And all of these features are designed by the architect. Okay, let's get started. So in this class, we'll go through all the different typical specialties, starting with signage, then working into the bathroom, all the bathroom accessories, folding panel partitions, also known as operable walls, wall and corner guards, display boards like dry erase boards or chalkboards, fire protection specialties, essentially fire extinguishers, and then we'll wrap it up with lockers. Then we'll move into furnishings, and essentially what we're talking about, shades and blinds, and office furniture. Alright, let's begin with signage. So probably what you think about when you think about signage would be office numbers or room numbers, and that's the first one on the list, door signs or room signs. And the architect comes up with the sign schedule and defines all the different office numbers or hotel room numbers or conference room numbers, and defines the shape and size and the colors of the signs. And those are ordered from a specialty contractor or a signage contractor. And sometimes they take a long time to get. So getting the room numbers nailed down and getting that order in place is pretty important to make sure you can turn over the building on time. Other types of signs would be directional signs to navigate through the building, directories. So you see on the right, we have a directory as well as some display signage where people can slide papers in there for announcements. And then we also have exterior signs. Sometimes your landscaper provides the exterior signs, but depending on the type, it may also be your specialties contractor. Alright, the specialties contractor installs a lot of items in the bathroom. So in this case, we're talking about toilet compartments, or bathroom partitions, that's synonymous. So your two major categories would be floor mounted or ceiling mounted, and floor mounted is what you see in the photo, and those tend to be less expensive, but they're harder to keep clean. You can imagine stuff gets in and around the pilasters, which are down on the ground. Versus ceiling mounted, which are raised up in the air, and they're much easier to clean underneath. However, with ceiling mounted, you need some substantial miscellaneous metals above your head to carry the load of the partition. And then the next variable is which material type would you want. So there's any number of options. So the first option would be metal, and I would say in my experience this is the most typical. So metal tends to be powder-coated galvanized steel, for example. But you could also do stainless steel. Your next option would be plastic, and this would be high-density polyethylene or HDPE. And this is a solid molded plastic panel. Your next option would be plastic laminate, followed by solid phenolic, and solid phenolic would be resin-impregnated craft paper. And your last option would be FRP or fiberglass reinforced panels. And often what you're looking at for choosing a bathroom partition is durability, cost effectiveness, microbial resistance, ease in cleaning, graffiti resistance depending on where you're installing this, and recycled content. And of course the materials must be fire resistant. So again, I typically see powder-coated galvanized steel, but it could be any one of these options. Then in the photo you have two different types. You have a urinal screen, which is usually wall mounted as you see, and a toilet divider or partition. And as you can see, this is installed after tile is complete. Okay, a similar specialty item as the bathroom compartments would be lockers. And of course you would put lockers in a locker room or in a school, but we're also seeing lockers being installed in offices quite a bit to give the occupants a place to shower. The typical material would be steel like you see on the left, but it could be any of those materials we described in the previous slide. On the right, for example, we have plastic laminate. And similar to toilet compartments or bathroom partitions, lockers are usually installed towards the end, after tile in this case. Okay, this is where the specialty contractor has a lot of different items, toilet and bath accessories. So let's go down the list. Grab bars. You see grab bars in the stall as well as in the shower. Utility shelves, mop and broom holders. This might be in your custodian closet, for example, like you see in the bottom left. Paper towel dispensers and receptacles. We're back in the bathroom now. Same with toilet paper dispensers, soap dispensers, hand dryers. In the shower, like you see in the bottom right, shower curtain rods, as well as the shower curtain, robe hooks, towel hooks, shower seats like you see in the bottom right, also benches, soap dishes, towel pins, and occasionally mirrors. And I say occasionally because in a substantial size job, the interior glazier is probably doing your mirrors, but maybe in a smaller job you would have the specialties contractor install mirrors. And you see that in the top left. And similarly to the previous slides, almost all of these items are installed towards the end, after the finishes are complete. Okay, next would be folding panel partitions or operable walls. And I'm sure you've seen these before, where you're in a large conference room, the operable wall is slid out, and it separates the conference room into two smaller rooms. The way this works is you have a pocket or a closet, and all these panels are stacked nicely in the closet, and then there's a big door that closes to finish off that space and hide those panels. When it's time for the folding panel partition to come out, each one of those panels slides on an overhead track into the space all the way across the room, and then they lock to each other. On either end, from left to right, there's a seal that extends and seals off the partitions to the walls on either side, and there's also a seal that extends down to the floor. All of these seals are meant to reduce the sound transmission from one side of the wall to the other. So how is it installed? Well, way back, even before the specialties contractor arrives, the miscellaneous metals have to be installed for the overhead attachment. So you see in the photo here, this is a pretty substantial wide flange section to carry the load of the partition. And it usually hangs from the structure as you see here, welded to the steel above or anchored to the concrete above. And you see the big kickers coming off. This is to keep the operable wall from swaying. So usually the miscellaneous metals contractor or the ironworker installs this steel. Then it's time for the specialties contractor to mobilize for the first time. And you can see if you look really closely in the flange of that wide flange, there's holes drilled in it. And ultimately that's for hangers to hold the track of the future operable wall. Then it's time to install the all thread through those holes and the hangers. Ultimately the hangers will hold the track. So the photo on the bottom right was a dining hall in a dorm, and this was pretty intricate. The operable partitions were meant to block off different sections of the dining hall. And I mentioned this way back when we talked about miscellaneous metals after our structural steel lesson. Miscellaneous metals are often neglected and they're not coordinated very well. You can imagine in the bottom right, if this miscellaneous metals was not coordinated very well, all those kickers and the hangers are going to clash with duct or pipe or the structure. And so if you're at all involved with miscellaneous metals, it is nice to get those coordinated well in advance before you get out in the field and start installing something complicated like you see here. Okay, let's assume our miscellaneous metals are in place, our hangers are in place. The next step would be to install the track. And you see in the top right, the bottom side of the track. And this is often when the specialties contractor goes away for a while, because now other trades need to move in. So above that track is a bulkhead, or a wall that extends from the track all the way up to the deck. And it's usually steel studs with drywall on both sides, usually insulation in between. And that's to reduce sound transmission up and over the wall. Then the drywall ceiling comes in, or the acoustical ceiling tile comes in, paint happens in the room, flooring's installed. Then the specialties contractor mobilizes again, this time with the operable wall. And in some cases, your building is just about complete, and there aren't big holes in the side of the building anymore to get partitions in. So I was on a really large job where the operable wall was enormous, and we had to bring the folding panels in before the enclosure was done, because otherwise we would have never got it in the building. It definitely wouldn't have fit in the elevator. So let's assume you got your panels in, you were able to coordinate that in advance. The panels are stood up, they hang in the track, and the wall is functionally tested to make sure all the seals work and everything fits together nicely. And just a couple other things to watch out for. At the bottom of the operable wall, a nice flat floor is required to get that seal in place. And for example, in the bottom left photo, on either end of the wall, you would want some substantial backing behind the wall, such as multiple studs stood up, or even tube steel, for example, to take the impact of the folding partition banging into your wall. The weight of these panels is pretty substantial, and when someone's sliding it down the track, it can get some serious momentum, and you don't want to damage your wall. Okay, as far as specialties goes, this tends to be one of the bigger items. Let's move on to a much smaller item, wall and corner guards. So your drywall, especially corners, tend to get damaged over time, especially in a corridor, so wall and corner guards are often specified. The photo on the left shows a plastic corner guard, the photo on the right shows stainless steel. Really, the only reason to choose one over the other would be your budget and the look you're going for. Clearly, the stainless steel is a little more expensive. Display boards. Typically, we're talking about dry erase boards like you see in the photos, but we could also be talking about chalkboards or tack boards where you can hang things with thumbtacks. So the dry erase boards you see here are quite typical. There's also a special paint now where the wall is painted and you can use dry erase markers on that paint. And I'm not entirely convinced because what I've seen so far, you can usually see remnants of the marker on the wall, even after you scrub it. And currently the trendy thing now for dry erase boards is to have a big glass board. It performs the same function as what you see here, a little more expensive, looks a little fancier, I suppose. And the last thing which is trendy is to have dry erase markers just on glass. And this might be glass separating the office from a corridor or something similar. And when we're talking about glass like that, that would be the interior glazier who installs it. Okay, before we talk about fire protection specialties, notice behind the glass in this office, we have one of those dry erase boards made out of glass. This is apparently where we're headed with dry erase boards. Okay, fire protection specialties, really what we're talking about here is fire extinguishers. And the quantity of fire extinguishers and the spacing between them is dictated by code, depending on the fire hazard. And they're usually noted on the general drawings at the beginning of the drawing set, specified by the architect. And fire extinguishers are either mounted on brackets, as you see on the left, or in cabinets, as you see on the right. Although local code will dictate this requirement, usually there can't be anything protruding more than 4 inches into a walkway, corridor, passageway, or aisle. And that's usually why you see a recessed or a semi-recessed cabinet in corridors, as you see in the photo on the right. Of course, the less expensive option, if it's allowable, is to surface mount a cabinet, or hang it on a bracket without a cabinet like you see on the left. The height of the fire extinguisher, of course, needs to comply with code as well, but usually the handle needs to be somewhere between 3.5 feet to 5 feet above the finished floor. Also, the height and the size of the recessed or semi-recessed cabinets needs to be coordinated ahead of time with the framer to frame out an opening. It would be really annoying to have to cut into walls at this stage of the game to install a fire extinguisher cabinet. The glass that you see in the cabinet is usually 1/8 inch float glass. Okay, the type of fire extinguisher that's used is required by code, depending on the fire hazard. So the designation in the United States would be Class A for ordinary combustibles, Class B for flammable liquids or gases, Class C, electrical equipment, Class D, combustible metal fuel sources, or Class K, a cooking fire. Other locations, such as the UK, are similar but not exactly the same. The point is, depending on the fire hazard, the fire is extinguished in a different way, and the contents inside the extinguisher are either dry chemical, halon, water, foam, or carbon dioxide for different purposes. And the extinguisher needs to be labeled as such, describing the classification. And it also is labeled to show the capacity and the effective area that it can cover when it's used. Okay, to cap this off, often a fire extinguisher sign needs to be mounted above the fire extinguisher, and you can see that on the left. And one last note on the construction side, fire extinguishers should not be placed in the cabinets or mounted on walls until the last possible moment. And that's because as soon as you put them out in the hall, one of the trades is going to grab it and use it for fire watch in whatever work they're doing. So these are the permanent fire extinguishers, not for construction use, so often the GC collects all these and disperses them at the very last moment. Okay, so that wraps up specialties. So now that you've seen all these items, you can picture the type of contractor that would do this work. Typically, they're a carpenter by trade. Next up would be furnishings, and the first item would be blinds and shades. So blinds, as you see on the left, are usually horizontal window blinds, and I'm sure we're all used to these in our home, for example. Shades in a commercial setting are usually roller shades like you see on the right, and the fabric is usually one of two things. It's either light filtering, which means some light comes through, and that's what you see in the photo, and the architect would specify the openness factor, such as 10% or 20% openness, depending on how much light he or she wants to bring into the building. Your other option would be a light block shade, which would have 0% openness factor. This is truly to block all light. Often you see full light block shades in a conference room, for example, when you need to use a projector. You can also have dual shades where you have two rolls right next to each other, and that gives you the capability of providing light filtering and light blocking depending on the function for the day. And to operate a shade, the photo on the right has a stainless steel ball chain and pulley system, or it could be electrically operated like you see with the switch on the far right. If it's electrically operated, that requires coordination with the electrician, and the electrician needs to pull power to each one of these window heads. And then there needs to be conduit for the controls out to each of the switches or the control panel. In a hotel or a multifamily project perhaps, you might see other products which are more typical for residential applications, such as sheer fabrics or vertical blinds, cellular or honeycomb shades or curtains. However, in most other commercial applications, the typical solution is what you see on the left, aluminum horizontal window blinds, or what you see on the right, roller shades. And both of these items are usually installed at the bitter end because they attract a lot of dust and dirt, so you want to be pretty clean before these are installed. Okay, so furniture is next, and this means we are just about complete. In fact, I would say 9 out of 10 times, the owner does not have the general contractor install furniture. The owner usually takes it on themselves. So the general contractor may be pretty close to being done at this point. But let's see what we're talking about when we describe furniture. So a furniture contractor would install cubicles like you see here, and we have similar cubicles in this photo. We're also talking about conference room tables and chairs, or lobby furniture, for example. Any furniture you can think of in any given building, that's what we're talking about with this scope. If we're talking about a hotel, we're talking about all the furniture in the room. The dresser, the bed, the nightstand. All of that furniture falls under the furniture contractor scope. And lastly, we could be talking about outdoor furniture, and depending on what's chosen, this could be the furniture contractor, which in this case it was, or it could be the landscaper if we're talking about benches or more heavy-duty furniture. Alright, when the building looks like you see in these photos, that means it is just about complete. In this class, we talked about all the different specialties that could be installed, all falling under CSI Division 10, from signage through the bathrooms, operable walls, wall and corner guards, display boards, fire extinguishers, and lockers. Then we wrapped up with furnishings, shades and blinds, as well as furniture. So as far as architectural work goes, the inside of the building is now done. So clearly this is a major milestone, but we're not complete yet. We have a number of items to do on the outside. So the next lesson, we'll talk about paving, hardscape, and landscape. So when we're done with those topics, we'll have the exterior of the building polished off as well, and we will be just about complete with the entire project. We'll see you at the next lesson.